It started with a single letter slipped under my door in the middle of the night. No return address, no explanation. Just a demand: remove it within 48 hours or face legal action. I thought it was a mistake, maybe some HOA mix-up. But the next morning, when I saw the red spray paint on my fence and the board president watching from her car, I knew it wasn't. What began as a petty complaint about my garden turned into a neighborhood-wide war of intimidation. Hidden cameras and secret meetings I wasn't supposed to know about. And when I finally discovered what they were trying to hide, it wasn't just about my property anymore. For nearly 5 years, life in Maple Grove Estates felt peaceful, the kind of quiet, tree-lined neighborhood people dreamed of retiring to. The lawns were trimmed like golf courses, the driveways gleamed with luxury SUVs, and everyone waved just enough to appear friendly. It was the kind of place where small talk replaced real connection, and perfection was expected like a silent law. For Emma and her husband Daniel, moving here had been a dream come true. They'd worked decades to afford this modest corner house drawn by the promise of safety, stability, and community. Every morning, Daniel watered the rose bushes by their white picket fence, proud of how the blooms framed their porch. Emma baked for the neighborhood potlucks, trying to fit in with people who seemed to measure worth by the shine of their mailboxes. At first, it worked. The couple smiled through board meetings, paid their dues on time, and followed every rule written and unwritten. But in Maple Grove, peace had a price. The HOA board wasn't just about keeping things beautiful. It was about control, quiet, constant, and absolute. The board president, Linda Harris, had a reputation. Early 50s, always in pressed pastel suits with a clipboard that seemed welded to her arm. She wasn't elected so much as obeyed. If your trash can lingered at the curb too long, Linda noticed. If your paint shade strayed from the approved palette, she'd cite the code by memory. People whispered that she didn't run the HOA, she ruled it. For months, Emma ignored the tension. She brushed off the gossip about neighbors being fined for invisible violations: grass too tall, mailbox too dull, curtains not neutral enough. It all felt distant, like something that happened to other people, until one small decision made her the next target. It started with a bench. A simple wooden bench Daniel built by hand, placed under the big oak tree in their front yard. It wasn't fancy, just smooth, sturdy, and painted a soft sky blue. But that single act of personal touch broke the unwritten law of uniformity. The bench stood out just enough to catch Linda's eye. 2 days later, Emma found a note taped to her front door, an official HOA violation. Unauthorized exterior modification. Remove immediately or face daily fines. She laughed at first. It had to be a misunderstanding. How could a bench, a harmless place to sit, threaten the look of the community? But that letter was only the beginning. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street. The friendly smiles disappeared. Someone even took photos of their front yard at night. Every day, another notice arrived, each one colder, more personal. Emma didn't know it yet, but that blue bench had ignited something much deeper. Beneath the manicured lawns and polite small talk, Maple Grove had cracks, and the HOA intended to bury anyone who exposed them. The quiet life they'd built was about to unravel. And the people enforcing the rules, they were about to show just how far they'd go to protect their control. The next few weeks turned Maple Grove from a peaceful suburban retreat into a slow-burning battlefield. What began as a minor disagreement over a simple bench turned into a campaign of quiet, calculated pressure. It started small, the kind of things that made Emma question her own sanity. First, the warning letters. Every few days, a new notice appeared in their mailbox. Each one looked official, typed in the same cold, bureaucratic tone, stamped with the HOA seal. Violation: unapproved structure. Violation: improper landscaping. Violation: unsightly yard ornamentation. The bench had become the symbol of rebellion, and the board was determined to crush it. At first, Emma and Daniel tried to comply. They repainted the bench to a softer gray, one that matched the neighborhood color guide. Still, the letters kept coming. Then came the fines: $50, $75, $100 a day. When they tried to dispute the charges, they were told the board would review their case in due time. Weeks passed. Nothing changed. The neighbors who used to chat with Emma stopped coming by. The woman across the street, once friendly, now turned away when their eyes met. Others began whispering behind drawn curtains. Someone even left an anonymous note in Emma's mailbox: "Stop causing trouble. We don't want attention from the board." It became clear this wasn't just about a bench. It was about control. And anyone who questioned it became an example. Then came the photos. One morning, Daniel found a printed image on their porch, a zoomed-in shot of him sitting on the bench, taken from across the street. For documentation, the attached note read. The message was clear: "We're watching you." Emma's frustration began to harden into defiance. She started reading the HOA bylaws late into the night, page after page of vague wording and technical loopholes. It was a maze designed to confuse, to keep power in the hands of a few. And Linda Harris, the HOA president, knew how to use every line to her advantage. The breaking point came when a letter arrived accusing them of lowering community property values. The justification: their garden, the one Daniel had spent years cultivating, was overgrown. Never mind that every flower was perfectly trimmed, every bush symmetrical. It didn't matter. The accusation itself was enough to justify new fines. Emma requested to see the photos used as evidence. The HOA refused. Confidential material, they said. Internal documentation. That's when Emma realized the game wasn't about fairness. It was about submission. The next HOA meeting was her first chance to fight back. She showed up prepared, organized, polite, determined. The room was full of board members and a few residents, most of whom looked uncomfortable to even make eye contact. Linda sat at the center table, posture perfect, expression unreadable. When Emma began to speak, calm, respectful, citing their own bylaws, Linda interrupted her within seconds. "You're out of order. You're not on the agenda." "But I filed a request. Requests must be approved by the board. Yours was not." That was it. No hearing, no chance to explain, no discussion. The gavel hit the table, and Emma was told to leave. That night, she stood on her porch, staring at that blue-gray bench. What had it all been for? A place to sit, to watch the sunset. Something so simple had turned into a war she hadn't asked for. Daniel wanted to give up, to just remove it and move on. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that if they gave in now, it wouldn't stop. Today, it was the bench. Tomorrow, it could be anything. So she did the one thing Linda didn't expect. She started documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every notice, every conversation. She built a paper trail. She even bought a small camera and installed it above her front porch, aimed at the street. Days later, the footage caught something shocking. Linda's car parked outside late at night, headlights off. She sat there for almost 15 minutes, staring at their house before driving away. Emma's stomach turned. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was personal. When she tried to report the harassment, the local authorities brushed it off. HOA issues are civil, not criminal, the officer said. Best to settle it internally. But there was no internal left. The HOA was the problem. Then, one morning, things escalated even further. Emma woke up to find a bright orange tag nailed to their mailbox. Foreclosure warning. Pending lien for unpaid HOA fines. She froze. The total balance listed was over $9,000 for a bench, a garden, and unsightly decor. The HOA had added interest and administrative fees without notice. They were trying to take her home. That afternoon, Linda arrived in person. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, voice calm and rehearsed. She claimed it was nothing personal, just procedure. But Emma saw the satisfaction in her eyes. "You should have just followed the rules," Linda said as she walked away. For the first time, Emma didn't feel fear. She felt clarity. She called a local journalist, one known for covering housing disputes. At first, the reporter was skeptical. "HOA stories don't usually get much traction," he said. But when Emma mentioned the late-night surveillance, the photos, the liens, he agreed to meet. Over the next week, Emma gathered everything: the videos, letters, fines, even testimonies from neighbors who had been targeted before. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were selectively punishing homeowners who questioned them. Those who complied got favors. Those who didn't got crushed. The journalists started digging deeper and found something explosive. The HOA had been funneling funds into a maintenance account that didn't actually exist. Thousands of dollars in resident fees had vanished under Linda's watch. When the first story went live, the neighborhood erupted. Emails flooded the HOA's inbox. Neighbors who had stayed silent finally started talking. And for the first time, Linda's perfect facade began to crack. But power doesn't let go easily. The next morning, Emma woke to the sound of pounding on her door. A notice was being taped up by an HOA security contractor. Emergency hearing. Scheduled immediate suspension of membership privileges. It was retaliation, swift and desperate. They accused her of defamation, of unauthorized recording, of creating a hostile environment. But Emma wasn't backing down. The evidence was already public. The journalist's follow-up piece was scheduled to air that evening, with interviews, documents, and footage, including the one of Linda's car idling outside her home at night. The pressure built like a storm. Neighbors started choosing sides. Some thanked Emma quietly in the grocery store aisles, whispering, "You're doing the right thing." Others avoided her completely, terrified of being the next target. As the HOA scrambled to defend itself, the truth spread faster than their denials. Local news picked up the story. Social media caught fire with clips of the report. "HOA harasses homeowner over bench" became the headline. And the comments poured in from people across the country who'd lived through the same nightmare. That night, Emma stood on her porch again. The same place where this all began. The same bench that had caused so much chaos. Except now, she didn't see it as a symbol of defiance. She saw it as proof of endurance. Still, the war wasn't over. The board had called an emergency community meeting for the next evening. Rumor had it Linda planned to clear her name and restore order. Emma knew what that meant: public confrontation. A final attempt to humiliate her into silence. But this time, she wasn't walking in unprepared. Because she had something the board didn't: the truth, the proof, and the eyes of the entire neighborhood watching. The calm before the storm had passed. The fight for her home, her peace, and her dignity was about to reach its breaking point. And when the gavel came down at that next meeting, nothing in Maple Grove would ever be the same again. The night of the emergency community meeting arrived like a storm everyone had seen coming, but no one wanted to face. By sunset, the Maple Grove clubhouse parking lot was overflowing. SUVs lined the curbs. Porch lights flickered from every direction, and the air buzzed with low, anxious chatter. For a neighborhood built on quiet perfection, this was chaos. Inside, every chair was filled. Residents who hadn't shown up to a meeting in years now leaned forward, whispering nervously. At the front, the HOA board sat in a neat, rehearsed line, papers stacked, faces tight. And in the middle, like a general before battle, sat Linda Harris. Her pastel suit was flawless, her expression calm, her clipboard ready. Emma stood near the back, clutching a small folder to her chest, her entire life in printed proof. Beside her, Daniel squeezed her hand, silent but steady. She could feel her pulse in her throat. Weeks of fear, humiliation, and anger had all led here. When the meeting began, Linda's voice sliced through the murmurs. "Thank you all for attending. We've had some unfortunate misinformation spread recently that has damaged the reputation of this board and, by extension, our community." The word misinformation hung heavy in the air. People shifted uneasily. Linda continued, her tone smooth and confident. "We've called this special meeting to clarify that the board has acted within its full legal authority. Certain residents have chosen to make baseless accusations against our management, creating unnecessary division. Tonight, we will address these issues directly and restore order to Maple Grove Estates." She paused, scanning the room, her gaze landing right on Emma. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to step forward?" A ripple moved through the crowd. Every eye turned toward her. Emma's legs felt like lead, but she walked, slow, steady, refusing to break. She stood in front of the table, the board elevated on their platform, looking down at her. The image was symbolic, just like it had always been. Linda folded her hands. "You've made some serious claims about this board, Mrs. Carter. You've accused us of harassment, financial misconduct, and I haven't accused," Emma cut in, her voice trembling but clear. "I've proven." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda's smile tightened. "Excuse me." Emma opened her folder and began placing printed documents on the table, one after another. "These are the letters you sent, threatening foreclosure. These are the fines you imposed without due process. These," she said, holding up a stapled packet, "are financial statements that show missing funds from the HOA's maintenance. Account money residents paid for years that never went where it was supposed to." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Linda's composure faltered for the first time. "You're not authorized to," Emma interrupted again, louder now. "And this," she said, pulling out a photo, "is you parked outside my home? At 11:47 p.m., the same night my property was photographed without consent. Someone in the crowd whispered, 'Is that real?' Another said, 'That's her car.'" Linda's voice rose, sharp now. "Those images were taken illegally." "No," Emma replied calmly. "They were taken by my own security camera. On my property. I did exactly what you've done to so many of us, documented what happens when people think no one's watching." A low hum of shock filled the room. Some residents started nodding, whispering to one another. Emma could feel the momentum shifting. Linda tried to regain control, slapping her gavel down. "Enough. You are out of order, Mrs. Carter. This meeting is not for personal attacks." Emma didn't flinch. "This isn't personal, Linda. This is accountability." The board members looked uneasy now. One man, Mark, the treasurer, adjusted his glasses, his eyes darting to the documents. "Linda," he muttered, barely audible but caught by the mic, "these figures. They don't match the reports you gave us." The room went dead silent. Linda's face flushed crimson. "Mark, that's not," but before she could finish, a new sound filled the room, the faint buzz of a phone vibrating, then another. People began pulling out their devices. Notifications, links. The journalist had just published the follow-up story. Emma saw it on Daniel's screen. Maple Grove HOA president under investigation for financial misconduct and resident harassment. Photos, documents, video stills. All of it. The crowd erupted. Some people stood up, shouting questions. "Is this true? Did you take our money? You threatened foreclosure over a bench." Linda slammed her gavel again, shouting for order, but it was too late. The facade was crumbling in real time. Her polished authority was dissolving into panic. Emma stood still, letting the noise wash over her. For weeks, she had felt small, trapped under their rules, buried by their letters. Now, for the first time, she saw fear in their eyes. Linda turned on her board members, whispering furiously, but they were already distancing themselves. Mark spoke up again, this time louder. "I'm not going down for this," he said, pushing back his chair. "You told us those transfers were for landscaping. Sit down, Mark." Linda snapped, but her voice cracked. The HOA secretary, a quiet woman who rarely spoke, finally did. "Linda," she said, voice trembling, "the account you've been using. It's in your name. Phones recording." The sound of dozens of people realizing that their trust, their dues, their peace had been traded for power. Linda's hands shook as she gathered her papers. Asterisk. "This meeting is adjourned," she muttered. "I will not be subjected to this circus." But before she could stand, a voice from the crowd called out, "You made us feel powerless. Now you get to feel it too." Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then louder, building like thunder. Emma didn't smile, not yet. She wasn't here for revenge, she was here for truth. As Linda stormed out, a few residents followed her, demanding answers. Others rushed to Emma, thanking her, some even apologizing for staying silent. The treasurer promised an immediate audit. The secretary vowed to contact the county office. Change, for the first time, felt possible. But beneath the chaos, Emma felt something heavier than victory: exhaustion. The fight had cost her nights of sleep, endless worry, moments of doubt. And yet, standing there, surrounded by people who finally saw what she'd been fighting all along, she realized it had been worth every second. Outside the clubhouse, cameras flashed. The journalist was there, waiting. "Mrs. Carter," he asked, "did you expect it to end like this?" She looked toward her street, the glow of porch lights, the same peaceful facades that had once hidden so much fear, and shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "But I hoped it would start something." The air outside was crisp, the night strangely calm. For the first time in months, she felt the tension in her chest ease. Still, she knew it wasn't over. HOA boards don't crumble overnight, and people like Linda rarely disappear quietly. There would be paperwork, investigations, maybe even lawsuits. But the truth was out, and that changed everything. As Emma walked home, she passed the same oak tree where this all began. The bench was still there, steady, quiet, waiting. A symbol of something small but stubborn. She sat down, feeling the cool wood under her hands, and listened. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the muffled sounds of people arguing. Others talking about reform, a few even laughing nervously. The neighborhood was alive again, not perfect, but real. For the first time, the rules didn't scare her anymore. And as a gust of wind rustled through the leaves above, Emma whispered to herself, half relief, half promise this time. They picked the wrong homeowner. The camera would fade out on that image, Emma on her bench under the oak tree. The symbol of her defiance standing strong against the quiet tyranny that once ruled her life. And the audience would feel it too, the weight of standing up. The cost of doing what's right, and the quiet satisfaction of watching power finally crumble. The weeks following the explosive HOA meeting felt like the slow exhale after a storm that had hovered too long. Maple Grove Estates, once pristine, polished, and silent, was now buzzing with life, gossip, and reckoning. The illusion of perfection had been shattered, and in its place, something far more honest began to take root. For the first time in years, the HOA boardroom wasn't a fortress of control. It was a war zone of accountability. Residents who once avoided eye contact now filled every seat during public meetings. People who had whispered complaints in secret were now standing up, asking questions, demanding receipts, transparency, explanations. And at the center of it all, the name Linda Harris carried the same weight it once did, but for a very different reason. 2 days after the meeting, the county finance office received a formal complaint backed by Emma's evidence and the journalist's investigation. Within a week, state auditors were digging through years of HOA records. The missing funds weren't small, tens of thousands of dollars. In maintenance fees and beautification projects had quietly been rerouted into an account under Linda's personal control. When the news broke publicly, it was like a spark on dry grass. Local stations aired the footage from the meeting, highlighting Linda's denial, the board's collapse, and Emma's quiet composure amid the chaos. The headline read, "Homeowner exposes corrupt HOA president, caught misusing community funds." Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid Emma were now leaving flowers by her fence. Someone even repainted the faded letters of Maple Grove Estates on the community sign, this time without Linda's name at the bottom. For a while, Emma didn't know how to react. She hadn't set out to be a symbol. All she'd wanted was peace, the right to sit on her bench and watch her garden bloom without fear of punishment. But now her fight had become something bigger. The HOA was placed under temporary supervision by a neutral third party administrator, a rare but necessary move after the scandal. Linda was officially removed from her position pending investigation. Her house, once the showcase of the neighborhood, sat dark and empty most nights. People said she'd moved in with her sister while waiting for her court date. No one really knew for sure. But for every downfall, there was rebuilding to be done, and it started small. The first new board meeting under temporary management was packed. Emma sat near the front, her folders still in hand out of habit. This time, the air felt different, cautious but hopeful. Residents volunteered to join committees, offer ideas, and take responsibility for their own community again. One elderly man, a veteran named George who'd lived there since the beginning, stood and said, "We forgot this place was supposed to be ours, not one person's." The room fell silent, and for the first time in a long time, people nodded instead of whispering. As the weeks turned into months, change spread through Maple Grove like slow sunlight. The endless violation letters stopped. Fines were reviewed. The arbitrary approved color palette rule was dropped. Homeowners could finally add personality, a flower pot, a swing, a flag, without fear. The rules remained, but they were grounded in reason, not ego. And the blue bench, the spark that started it all, became something of a legend. People started calling it the freedom seat. Kids sat on it after school, couples during evening walks. Someone even placed a small plaque beside it that read, "For anyone who's ever been told to sit down and stay quiet, sit here instead." It wasn't long before Emma's story reached beyond Maple Grove. The journalist's follow-up feature aired nationally, drawing attention to the growing number of HOA abuse cases across the country. People flooded the comments, sharing their own experiences, the fines, the intimidation, the fear of losing their homes over petty rules. Emma received hundreds of messages, some from strangers, others from people in her own city who said her courage had inspired them to confront their boards too. It was overwhelming, but also deeply validating. One evening, sitting on the porch with Daniel, she read one message out loud from a woman in Texas. "I watched your story. My HOA fined me for having a ramp for my disabled son. I thought I was alone. Thank you for proving we're not powerless." Emma looked out at the neighborhood, the familiar roofs, the trimmed lawns, the small signs of individuality returning. She smiled softly. "Maybe that's what all this was for," she said. But victory didn't come without scars. The process of healing the neighborhood took time. Some residents still felt embarrassed for having stayed silent. Others resented the exposure, the media attention. Trust had to be rebuilt, one conversation at a time. Even so, progress showed in unexpected ways. The next community barbecue, the first in over a year, was crowded and lively. Children played tag on lawns that once had no play equipment signs. Neighbors laughed again, some even joking about repainting their mailboxes just to see what happens. When Emma arrived, people clapped quietly. She didn't make a speech, she just smiled, waved, and handed out plates of food. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, she walked past the clubhouse, the same place where she'd once been silenced, dismissed, humiliated. Through the glass windows, she could see a new board inside younger faces, different voices, arguing passionately but respectfully. Democracy in action, finally. She felt no bitterness toward the building anymore. Only relief. A few weeks later, the final piece of news arrived. Linda Harris had pleaded guilty to embezzlement and falsifying HOA documents. She avoided jail time but was ordered to pay restitution and was permanently banned from serving on any housing association board. When Emma read the article, she didn't celebrate. She just closed her laptop and exhaled. Justice didn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it was enough to simply be done. Daniel found her later that night in the garden, pruning the roses like she used to. "Feels like things are back to normal," he said. Emma smiled faintly. "Not normal," she replied. "Better." Because, in truth, something fundamental had shifted, not just in the HOA, but in her. She'd learned that peace without freedom wasn't peace at all. That silence in the face of injustice only feeds the bully. That sometimes, the smallest act of defiance, like refusing to remove a bench, can reveal the cracks in an entire system built on fear. Weeks later, the journalist returned one last time to film a short segment. "Where are they now?" update for viewers who'd followed her story. He asked her one final question on camera. "What's your advice for anyone living under an HOA that abuses its power?" Emma thought for a moment, her hands resting on the back of the bench. "Document everything," she said slowly. "Speak up even if your voice shakes. They rely on your fear, so the moment you stop being afraid, you've already won." The clip went viral again, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Months later, as spring arrived and the community began its first new term under a reformed, transparent board, Emma received an unexpected letter in the mail. No threats, no fines, just a simple note signed by all her neighbors. "Thank you for reminding us who this neighborhood really belongs to." She sat on her bench and read it twice, feeling a quiet warmth spread through her chest. The same neighbors who once avoided her now smiled when they passed, waving with genuine kindness. The same lawns once policed into uniformity now reflected personality: wind chimes, birdhouses, colorful flowers. Maple Grove was still a beautiful place, but now it was alive. Emma often thought about how close she'd come to giving up, how many nights she'd sat awake wondering if any of it was worth it. But now, watching children laugh under the oak tree and seeing life return to the street, she knew the answer. It had always been worth it. Because the real victory wasn't in defeating Linda or exposing corruption, it was in reclaiming their right to live freely, to breathe without fear of a letter, a fine, or a threat. It was in reminding everyone that communities are built on connection, not control. And though her story had ended, the impact lingered, a quiet warning to every board that forgot who they served, and a spark of courage for every homeowner who felt powerless in the face of petty tyranny. As the camera fades out on Emma sitting beneath the oak tree, the golden evening light spilling through the leaves, the bench gleaming softly in the sun, her voice would narrate the final lines. "They wanted to break me with fear. But fear loses its power when you stop hiding." Sometimes the smallest stand, a letter you refuse to obey, a rule you choose to question, can remind the world that power only exists when people surrender it. The screen would hold on that image, quiet, resolute, timeless, before fading to black with one final line. Never underestimate the strength of a homeowner who's had enough.